Houston in the blind.
He's engaged the override.
Hi, I'm Nicole Stott.
Nicole Stott is a retired astronaut.
And here's me in space. Today I'm going to look at how astronauts are portrayed in Hollywood. Cracking helmet, total recall. It's trying to present this exaggerated, dramatized kind of view of a helmet opening up in space.
I give up.
The helmet itself is really very durable. There's parts on it that if you hit it hard enough, you could crack them. If you, really moved fast towards like a sharp piece of metal or something. We try our best to avoid any contact with anything with the helmets because they can scratch easily too. When we do spacewalks, we're always talking about doing a glove check or a crew member check where you look each other over and make sure you don't see anything that looks like it might be a problem. And we each, about after every hour, we look over our whole gloves to make sure we haven't got any tears or holes in them where all of your air goes, spewing out to the deadly vacuum of space. But overall, the suits and the helmets are really very durable and have done a great job protecting us in space. Spacewalk and gravity.
Hubble telescope engaged, upgrade fully functional. Congratulations. Kick back, take the rest of the day off.
I remember the first time seeing the scenes in Gravity and just being so impressed by the visuals.
Can't beat the view.
Just the movement and the sound of it was so reminiscent of what I felt when I was outside and what I saw.
Do you have a visual on just what Mission Specialist Sharif is doing up there?
He appears to be doing some form of the Macarena.
There's definitely not as much chatter as what you are hearing. We try very hard to keep it to, what the tasks are about.
That would be just a best guess scenario on my part.
We might be playing music inside of the shuttle, but that's not something you'll hear throughout all of the, the comm that's going on. The spacewalks themselves are all really choreographed down to probably 5-minute increments, and maybe smaller depending on the task.
Please elaborate.
Houston will be letting us know how close we are on the timeline, and then we always have somebody inside the spaceship too, letting you know where to go next and what to do.
Am I a go to assist Dr. Stone in removing the panel?
Assistance appreciated.
The thing that stands out to most to me is that you'd never have George Clooney or any other crew member just kind of jetpacking around while the spacewalk was going on.
Tell him I still prefer my 67 Corvette.
The suits that we wear, though, do have jetpacks integrated into them, but they're not that big unit that he was wearing.
Never crossed my mind.
And they are meant to only be used in case of emergency. If for some reason you do get separated from the shuttle or the space station and you're tumbling and you need to get back to the shuttle, that's when you would use those. You never want to have to use those.
Mission abort. Initiate emergency disconnect from Hubble.
1 second.
Not 1 second, now. Shut it down.
Yeah, that was frustrating to me when I watched that movie and she didn't just stop, like put the tools down and just, abort.
Abort.
We need to get the hell out of here.
When they call for that abort, you saw how Clooney's character immediately, boom, 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 back to the station, disconnecting, talking to the ground about where all the crew members are, how they're getting back in.
Houston, this is Explorer. Copy. Kowalski,
Explorer's been hit. Explorer, do you read?
We absolutely train for these, what you would think of as worst case scenarios where you have to abort immediately.
Houston, I have a bad feeling about this mission.
Any number of things could go wrong out there that would require you to immediately have to go back to your safe place inside of the station or the shuttle.
It's been a rough week.
This situation where almost out of nowhere comes this massive field of debris.
Debris from the missile strike has caused a chain reaction.
Is really unlikely. There are people on the ground that track, single pieces of debris in space that are like the size of your hand or even smaller. And somebody down on the ground would have seen that coming way before the call that they were given in this movie.
We have to go. Houston, I've lost visual of Dr. Stone. Do you copy?
Yes, I copy. I'm just
Give me your position.
Oh, I don't know. I'm spinning. I can't
Spinning off like that, I think, is probably one of the greatest fears of any spacewalker.
Houston, you copy.
This hasn't happened to anybody in real life on the shuttle or on the station. But we do train for that as one of, our emergency scenarios, and we do that in the virtual reality simulator.
All right. Let's get out of here.
Ludicrous speed in Spaceballs.
Ludicrous speed! Go!
I have seen that in a lot of films. The stars that you see, all of a sudden it becomes these lines, and I think it's just to give you the feeling of going really super fast.
My brains are going into my feet!
I would say that the speed of the space shuttle is, in the grand scheme of things, a little bit ludicrous. I mean, it's 17,500 miles an hour, which is about 5 miles a second.
They must have hyperjets on that thing. And what do we got on this thing? A Cuisinart?
You don't get the lights like streaming by you like that, but you're going fast.
They've gone to plaid.
And, of course, we're orbiting the Earth. We're about 250 miles up. We don't really have a gas pedal for, accelerating or increasing speed. I guess you could make it equivalent. We've got this little handle that, can cause the thrust to increase that look like what you would fly the robotic arm with. We just push on it, and it gives this little burst of thrust out of the back of the thrusters. Of course, launching, that's kind of this controlled explosion happening below you, so the crew really doesn't have a button or a throttle or a handle for that. Robotic arm on the ISS in life.
I used to play catcher, but only in T-ball.
Really?
Not now. Not now. No, come on.
On the space station, and then even on the space shuttle before, we had this robotic arm, big white, long crane-looking kind of thing. And we could move equipment around with it. We could move whole big modules around with it. We could even strap people to the end of it and move them around with it during a spacewalk and things. What's different in this film...
So let's all agree we made our first and last mistake.
I mean, there's a number of things. But in this scene, though, too, that spacecraft is moving really fast. The arm itself, while it could, I think, physically be controlled to grab the spacecraft moving in, I think the way it was moving in, the speed and the difference between what was going on with the station, it probably would have just ripped the arm right off of the space station.
You gotta point and shoot, mother.
Yeah. We do grab vehicles like this that are flying to the space station with cargo in them. And I had the chance to do that one time with the Japanese cargo vehicle. It was the first one that flew up, and then we had to grab it with the arm. And because most of the time they dock automatically to the station. So that was really fun. I mean, that was the first time we used the arm and flew it in a totally different way. Probably as close to this as you could get, but the vehicle flew up and just kind of hovered next to us. I did like the way they moved through the station. They show them floating and flying several times, and that felt very real to me. That little metal rectangular thing, that's a drink bag, kind of like a big Capri Sun bag or something. That happens sometimes when you let go of something and don't Velcro it down. And the view through the window is really good. I don't know, in these movies, I don't know how they do it, make it look so real. Really looked good. Astronaut training in First Man.
Multi-axis trainer was designed to replicate roll coupling on 3 axes, the kind you might encounter in space. Challenge is to stabilize the machine before you pass out. First victim, Armstrong.
Like that first victim. Yeah, so in this scene, you see Neil Armstrong in what was called the multi-axis trainer. And this was used to train astronauts to get into all kinds of disorienting configurations that might happen because, in space there is no up or down. And if you start, these different rotations, you might have to fly yourself out of it. And you can see that he's having to complete a task while going through this really dynamic simulation.
If you work the math, it follows.
That is absolutely what we would have to do as part of any astronaut training. That is absolutely what you will feel like when you are going through something like this. I will say, though, I'm thankful that these days we don't use the multi-axis trainer anymore. We have different kinds of simulators, like through virtual reality, we can get thrown off the space station like during a spacewalk and spun around and then have to use little jetpacks to get ourselves oriented.
Just thinking about this lecture, it's kind of neat.
Neil Armstrong never actually used this trainer, but it was used for other programs during that early spaceflight time, and so it does represent what the astronauts would go through as part of their training. Now a training montage from Armageddon.
United States astronauts train for years. You have 12 days.
Gentlemen, welcome to our weightless environmental training facility.
When you train in the big pool, there's divers all around you, safety divers, divers that are helping you with the equipment, all of it, getting you in and out of the pool. The underwater work looks just like we would do if we were training to do a spacewalk.
So we're going swimming on this asteroid? Is that what this is for?
Thankfully, in space, it's easier to move around in those suits, and you just got to figure out how to get yourself stopped if you get moving too fast. But the reality of what's going on in that pool is just like I remember it. The underwater training for one spacewalk, I think I did 7 or 8 6-hour runs in the pool.
You have 12 days.
They couldn't do, I don't think, all of this training and testing in 12 days. But I don't think they would need to for this kind of mission either. For the movie, I think what they're trying to do is just give them like familiarization with what things would feel like.
Oh, easy on me, okay? It's my first time.
I love that they included the training in the T-38 jets. That's the airplanes we used and that we still use for astronaut training.
NASA's got some of the finest pilots in the world.
We do that because you want to get familiar with what it's like to work in a really complex system like a space shuttle would be. The airplanes provide that. You're in a real extreme environment. You're doing very challenging things. I mean, they're flipping you around.
You think we'll get hazard pay out of this?
It's almost like the multi-axis trainer where you're having to be a little bit disoriented and still, work safely. Every movie where they have people flying in airplanes like this, jets, the mask is always off. One of the first things you do when you strap into the jet is put the mask on and start breathing the oxygen, and that's one of the things that keeps you the safest in that airplane. And so never would we be flying in these jets with the mask off.
We need you to train them down here. You want to send these boys into space? Fine. I'm sure they'll make good astronauts. They don't know jack about drilling.
There's kind of a futuristic possibility in this. As we start to fly more in space, we really are going to be looking at going to the people that have these trade skills to fly them in space as astronauts.
The United States government just asked us to save the world.
Talk about the wrong stuff.
Removing helmet in space, mission to Mars. Yeah, if you remove your helmet in space, that's a really bad day. And I think in this scene, they are trying to give you the ultimate view of what it would look like. Sadly, it would take a little bit more time. In the vacuum of space, all of the fluids in your body are going to want to escape, and they're going to do that in a way that's like they're boiling off of you, which is not probably a good feeling. And then you will ultimately freeze like this, but you'll suffocate before that ever happens. Docking a spacecraft, Interstellar.
What are you doing?
Docking.
Okay, get ready to match our spin with the retro thrusters.
It's not possible.
No, it's necessary.
I love the way they did this scene. It's really an extreme example of a docking scenario and an emergency situation like this.
This is no time for caution.
Okay, so if I black out, you take a stick.
We do a lot of training where they're trying to put you in that extreme situation and to understand the capabilities of your own spacecraft and how you could manually fly.
Endurance is hitting stratosphere.
She's got no heat shield.
And I just love that they spoke through it.
Hey, you ready?
Ready.
And then visually they showed you how those two spaceships almost looked like they weren't moving at all when they finally came together, when in fact they were still really just like spinning like crazy.
Main engines on. Come on, baby.
So we use a lot of different thrusters on our spacecraft to move, to thrust and move higher up into orbit. Or I think in this scene they use a term retro thruster.
Get ready to match our spin with the retro thrusters.
Which is one that would actually thrust in a direction that would cause you to slow down and kind of back into orbit again, or to drop down in orbit, to go from high to low.
Pushing out of orbit.
And again, I liked that they used that appropriately in this film.
Initiating spin.
I just really think they did a good job on this. And portraying the physical load that you would be feeling on your body while that's happening. So when I talk about load, feeling the load, when you accelerate, it's like this feeling of weight on you. And so you're loaded up with G's. And on the shuttle when we launched, it was like 3 G's is what you would feel. So it would feel like 3 of you are sitting on top of you. In this Interstellar scene where they start spinning as fast as that space station was, you think about it, some of those carnival rides that you're on, when they spin you, all of a sudden you feel like you're pinned back because there's this increased load on your body. Easy. You see the one character is just really leaned over in her seat and ultimately passes out. I think that's interesting because you've got McConaughey flying the spacecraft. And I've always noticed this. When you're the one flying, you physically can overcome more than if you're the passenger or you're the person that's kind of just in a benign position there. And that doesn't mean that ultimately you might not pass out too if the load gets to be too much and you're not recovering properly. But somehow you respond to it in a way that allows you to get through more. AI on spaceships and 2001 Space Odyssey.
All right, Hal. I'll go in through the emergency airlock.
Without your space helmet, Dave, you're going to find that rather difficult.
Hal, I won't argue with you anymore. Open the doors.
Dave, this conversation can serve no purpose anymore. Goodbye.
Hal?
Right now, I think the current status of artificial intelligence or AI on our space missions is that we're not really saying we have AI.
Where the hell did you get that idea?
What we do have is automated control of things. And that's a great thing because then the crew isn't having to interact all the time to maintain the systems or ensure that everything is good. That can happen automatically.
I think you know what the problem is just as well as I do.
Our hope is that the AI, whichever ones we do employ at some point, are not set up that they could take control of our spaceship.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
Sharing oxygen and a spacesuit. Rocketman.
I think if we stay on this heading for another 20 minutes, we'll see the Pilgrim.
What? I didn't do anything.
Oh my God.
Yeah, not so accurate here. They show the suit blowing up like that, I think, to just kind of give you a visual, reference to what is going on inside it. There's actually, pretty good structure in that suit, but it's just not flexible in a way unless it was a huge amount of pressure blasting off inside of the thing. Yeah, I don't think we could produce that. It would be a really bad day.
What?
So we have primary life support systems built into the suit. That's where you're getting your normal oxygen from.
Primary oxygen tank leak. We need to preserve his SOP.
Solution?
There's a secondary tank that's pressurized with oxygen that allows you to, backfill if you have a leak or are running out fast.
Don't do that. No, come on. Oh, man.
Maybe fortunately we don't have a line that you can hook up between the two.
Wasn't me.
What do you mean it wasn't you? We're 35 million miles from the nearest person!
Airlock, Event Horizon.
Okay. Captain, Justin just activated the door. It's on a 30-second delay.
Justin! Oh my God.
So similar to Mission to Mars, this really is kind of an exaggerated presentation of how the body would react to being exposed to the vacuum of space. On the space station right now, we have an airlock module, And it's the place that you go and you get all ready to go out on your spacewalk. And it's a place that allows you to isolate from the main spacecraft where you still want to breathe regular air and you still want to, live and survive and maintain a normal atmospheric pressure. And the airlock gives you the capability to dump all of that pressure and equalize with the vacuum of space.
I got him! Stand by, people! Stand by!
We've got pressure. Oh, we're coming, Justin! Coming!
The commander gets in and he's got them back inside and they close that outer hatch, and then it's like almost immediately they're opening the inner hatch and going inside.
There's a lot of things happening around here that I don't fully understand. I need time.
It takes about half an hour in a normal re-entry for the airlock to repressurize. There was a case of a guy who was doing a test, like a spacesuit test, and somehow got exposed to the vacuum.
Got to find out what happened to the other crew before the same thing happens to us.
He reports that he felt boiling of his spit on his tongue, and in the end he was fine. I have no idea how long that was. I mean, it had to be quick, because as soon as that started happening, they'd be looking at how do we get back in there and get this guy out.
I'd like some answers, Doctor.
You have the potential of popping eardrums and hurting yourself by that pressure change. So you want to bring that change on slowly, so that your body can react to it in a good way.
5 minutes TSA, you want to hold this hatch up. Okay.
Delightful scene, isn't it? Self-destruct button in Star Trek 3.
Awaiting final code for 1 minute countdown.
Code 000. Destruct. 0.
Destruct sequence is activated.
Really, there's nothing like this on board, but the range safety guys do have this capability. An Air Force team that's on the ground, and they're monitoring whenever a spacecraft is launching. They watch to make sure that it's maintaining control. And so they have the capability of flipping this switch and terminating the flight.
Computer, destruct sequence 1.
Which would, take the crew as well, if there was the possibility of it coming back and, causing harm to a greater population.
Destruct sequence completed and engaged.
It would be an explosion, yeah. So, and they would do that in a way that it, was as safe as possible in the air before, the vehicle came back and impacted the land.
Turn death into a fighting chance to live.
I think you learn about it, right, going into flight training. You're learning about how the flight is controlled and managed, and that's just, that's one part of it.
What have I done? What you had to do.
G-force training in Space Cowboys.
First one to pass out buys a beer tonight. It sure will take the wrinkles out.
So we have the opportunity as shuttle crew members to go experience the centrifuge. So this machine that kind of spins you around and simulates not just the G-forces that you'll feel.
What the hell's going on here?
You experience them like you would as you were launching. So it takes you through the same trajectory that you would experience launching on the space shuttle. And they mention it in the film. It's 3 Gs.
It was 3 Gs.
And you're on your back and it's coming through your chest, which really is a lot easier to handle than, in an airplane where you're doing aerobatics and pulling a lot of Gs, and it's coming through your head and you're having to squish down like this.
I'm sure you people think you're putting on a great show, but this is not a toy.
Getting sucked into space in Aliens. On the space station, we had what we called three primary emergencies, and it was fire, toxic atmosphere, like high concentration ammonia getting into the air, and depressurization, which was like a hole in your spaceship. And you didn't even want a little hole, because little holes mean the air is going out, and if you can't find that hole and isolate it, it means that you're going to have to, get in your spaceship and head home, because, all the air will be gone and you won't be able to breathe there anymore. if you get a hole, it's going to rush out really quickly. And so in doing so, it'll pull things towards the hole. So if the hole is big enough, it can pull you right out with it. Same thing is true in an airplane. When you're flying in a plane, you'll hear about like depressurization, or in movies you've seen like the door fly open and people get sucked out too. And that happens in space as well. Another scene in Gravity, crying in space.
Will you say a prayer for me? Or is it too late? I mean, I'd say one for myself, but I've never prayed in my life, so nobody ever taught me how.
Yeah, you can cry in space. I think you can cry pretty much anywhere. It's a little different in that, you know, you're floating, you're in microgravity, and when you squirt out water, it comes out in like little spheres, this like equal loading all around it. The tear just kind of coats your eye or builds up in like a little pool in, you know, in the duct of your eye. But there's nothing causing it to get pulled out of your eye. You know, she was moving around a little bit, so it could. I mean, if she had been crying enough and the tears had built up enough, and, you know, squeeze your eye, if it separates from your eye or your body, it will be like little, you know, balls of tears floating away.
Conclusion.
Yeah, I hope you've enjoyed this kind of comparison between what goes on in the movies and what happens in real life as much as I have. I am so thankful for the science fiction that we are presented with. I think it gives us an opportunity to think about what our future could be like. Already, we've seen so much sci-fi that's turned into sci-fact that I am really hopeful for what we'll see in the future, and I hope that we can continue to compare over time what we're doing in real life and how we're imagining it in the sci-fi movies.